When a careful engineer and a tender-hearted gardener meet at a sleepy lakeside inn, an old letter, a clock that skips a beat, and a summer storm nudge them toward a love that feels like home. The inn that breathed in time if you drove north long. Enough, past the wide, steady fields that lay like quilts over the Vermont hills. And if you turned right, not at the first wooden sign, but the second, the one with flaking paint that read, Maple Lantern in you would find a gravel lane that crackled under your tires as if it remembered every visitor who'd ever arrived, hungry for rest. At the far end of the lane, a white clapboard house waited with a wraparound porch and a collection of rocking chairs that looked like they'd learned patience from the wind. The lake beyond the inn was small and oval, tucked into a cradle of maple and birch, a mirror for clouds in the day and for a scatter of stars at night. It was the kind of place where minutes softened, where coffee tasted like a slow Sunday, and where conversations found a gentler rhythm without even trying. Mara. Ellis did not realize how much she needed the quiet until she turned off the engine and the hum inside her settled. She was a landscape gardener by trade, a listener of roots and soil, a curator of paths that invited footsteps to wander. Her hands, usually smelling faintly of basil or wet bark still, held a memory of spring's last work, a library courtyard, that she had stitched together with time and river stones. Summer had pressed a warm palm to New England, and with her last big project delivered, she allowed herself a treat she rarely chose. 3 days at a lakeside and her friend had adored. "You'll love it," her friend had said. "It's like staying in a lover's breath." Mara had laughed at the poetry of it, and then penciled the reservation into her planner in modest block letters, as if to keep from startling the plan. Inside the air smelled like sugared butter and lemon cleaner. A bronze bell sat crooked on the front desk beside a dish of peppermint candies and a jar of pencils sharpened to gentle points. The inn's owner, a woman with lively gray eyes, and the kind of posture that made you trust the firmness of her bed linens, appeared carrying a tray of cookies. "You must be Mara," she said, setting the tray down on the desk with a small thud of comfort. "I'm Helen. We're easy here. You can write your name, take a cookie, and tell me if you prefer quiet near the lake or quiet near the garden. We have both kinds." "Lake, please," Mara said, choosing a cookie that wore its chocolate chips like freckles. Helen slid a brass key across the desk, the tag stamped with a tiny maple leaf and the number 4. "Porch faces west," Helen added. "Sunset will try to make a meal out of you. Let it." Mara climbed the stairs, the runner cushioning each step, and found room 4 at the end of the hall. The door's paint had been touched up here and there with a slightly brighter shade, like a smile trying on lipstick. The room itself was not big but generous in its way, full of gentle things. A quilt stitched from blue squares that matched. The lake on a cloudy day, a small bookshelf surrendered entirely to novels with dog-eared pages, and an antique mantel clock that sat on a dresser, its face slightly foxed, its hands pointing to a truth of their own. The clock ticked with a heartbeat that made no promises to perfect time. Sometimes it skipped, then hurried. Sometimes it lingered on a minute, as if appreciating it. Mara set her bag by the open window and let the sounds of the lake drift in, a small splash, a distant laugh, the whisper of birch leaves flirting with the wind. In her pocket, her phone buzzed with a message from her brother. "You off-grid yet?" He'd teased that morning. She smiled and typed back, on a porch with a cookie. "The grid will have to miss me for a little while." She silenced the phone and tucked it into the nightstand beside a paperback novel she probably wouldn't touch. She didn't come here to make progress. She came to release the idea that progress was required. On the porch, the rocking chair accepted her like it had been expecting her, creaking in a friendly language. The lake lay ahead as if someone had spread a sheet of silver for the afternoon, and low clouds gathered in a way that anticipated late-day rain. She thought of her last month's careful marathon of design sketches, client presentations, nursery deliveries, and a torrential week when the supplier was late and she spent 4 mornings in her truck at dawn, calling and cajoling plants into her hands just in time for installation. She remembered the satisfaction of the last flagstone laid into mortar, the way the librarian had touched her arm and said, "You made a place that slows a person right down." Mara had smiled and swallowed. The good feeling like tea. She had always been the sort who cried, not at movies. But when someone recognized what she had tried to offer the world, the porch steps sounded behind her. It's not hurried or tentative, sure-footed. She turned. He was the kind of tall that revealed itself only when he stood still. The kind of broad-shouldered that you noticed more from the way his shirt sat than from any attempt to show it. He carried a canvas bag that had seen airports, a small folded umbrella sticking out like a practical afterthought. His hair had the calm of someone who didn't ask it to do much, and his eyes were a weathered green, a lake color she'd seen. After a storm, he held up a hand in a quiet hello. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't mean to intrude on the prime rocking chair." "There are 4 more, Mara said, gesturing along the porch. "This one just flatters me," laughed, the sound like a low note on a piano, and set his bag down. "I'm Theo," he said. "Room 5. The inn seems to number things like a train car. I almost walked past my door." "Mara," she said, and felt, as she sometimes did, a tiny pause in the air that came when names met for the first time. As if the space took a breath and made a note. He took the rocking chair down from hers, with an instinct that recognized how strangers share quiet space. The sky mused over a decision about rain. They rocked. An hour melted as peacefully as butter on warm bread. They said small things about the smell of the cookies. The way the clock in Mara's room had a licorice strange rhythm. The brilliance of Helen's decision not to put televisions anywhere visible. Theo mentioned that he was an engineer structural with a project in Burlington that had just wrapped. He spoke with the tidy confidence of a person who checks his math twice, even when nobody can see. Mara said she arranged gardens like gentle invitations, and he repeated the phrase softly, as if turning it in the light at some point. Helen pushed open the screen door with her hip and set 2 glasses of iced tea on a small porch table, each with a lemon slice that looked like it had been taught to float. "You two have the faces of people recovering from effort," she said. "There's nothing for it but sugar and lakes." "Do you read minds?" "What?" Theo asked. "I read Arrivals," Helen said, and went back inside, leaving them with the clink of ice and the intimacy of being seen without effort. The first drops of rain arrived like polite knocks, then found their confidence. The lake turned dimpled and a little delighted, as if enjoying its bath. A family staying in the cabin by the dock ran laughing for cover, the kids shrieking with that undercurrent of joy that only summer rain can produce. Mara breathed in the damp, that earth's heavy scent that hinted that the plants at the edge of the garden lavender. Bee balm, those frivolous pink coneflowers were exhaling too. "Can I ask you something odd?" Theo said after a while, the rain pulling a curtain of privacy around them. "Odd is my favorite category," Mara said. "Do you ever feel like time is less aligned and more a room you can walk around in?" He looked embarrassed the moment he said it, the way serious people do when they offer the softest part of themselves and brace for a joke, constantly. She said, relieved to meet that softness with her own. "Especially in places like this. It's like the house is breathing, and if you match it, you get let in on some secret you forgot you already knew." He rocked slowly. "I knew this hymn would be pretty. I didn't expect it to feel like a person." "Maple lantern," she said, saying the inn's name to taste it. "A lantern isn't a thing you look at. It's a thing that helps you look." He turned his head, and something in that steady gaze warmed her as surely as the tea. "I'm going to steal that," he said, "and pretend I've always thought it." "You can borrow it," she said. "Thoughts prefer circulation." Rain lasted 20 minutes, the kind that leaves everything rinsed enough to make the world look like it's wearing just washed linen. They carried their glasses back in, and Helen pointed a spatula at a chalkboard near the kitchen pass-through, where a list promised blueberry pancakes in the morning, corn chowder for lunch, porch music if the rain stops. Next to porch music was a small chalk drawing of a guitar with a smile. "I didn't pack my porch music clothes," Theo deadpanned. "Lucky for you," Helen said. "Our porch music dress. Code is human with ears." After the rain. The inn hummed with that pleasant energy that happens when a dozen strangers drift toward a shared plan. Chairs were pulled nearer. Someone set a basket of blankets by the door in case of chill. The yellow dog from the neighboring house wandered over with the unhurried entitlement of a beloved local and lay down under the table like a song choosing its key. Sunset started to unbutton the day, light slanting across the lake in long, warm strokes. Mara found herself setting her rocking chair beside Theos, as if done by muscle memory. A woman in her 60s with a braid as thick as a rope and a voice like toast began to strum. Her first song was one of those old Appalachian tunes whose lyrics felt as if they had been shipped across the sea in a wooden trunk and hung to dry on a fence. People listened with the collective exhale that music coaxes from rooms that haven't realized they were waiting to breathe together. Theo's knee bumped Mara's chair lightly in the small shifts of shared space, and she felt a gentle spark where calm met possibility, like static greeting a sweater fresh from the dryer. When the second song began, a new sound joined faint. At first, then clearer, the little mantel clock in the front parlor chiming the hour. It was not exactly on time with the sunset, it was on time with itself. The chime missed a beat, then corrected, and the effect was oddly endearing, like a dancer who recovers with style. People smiled. The musician laughed and said, "Guess I got a duet partner." In the pause between songs, Helen stepped forward with a small folded paper in her hand. "We found this in a book," she said, nodding toward the parlor shelf. "It fell out of a copy of The Bridge of San Luis Rey that someone left behind last fall. We don't know who. It's not a note exactly. More like a little fragment. But it seemed like porch music somehow." She opened the paper carefully as if it were a letter from a shy friend, and read, "If there's a reason I come here each June, it's because the clock in room 4 refuses to pretend that time is perfect. It keeps time like a heart keeps love, with small hesitations and small rushes. And that makes me brave enough to say what I might not say anywhere else. Here is where I remember. Life is not a line, it is a lake. It holds everything we throw into it, and it keeps reflecting the sky." Helen closed the paper and looked toward Mara almost apologetically. "Room 4, huh?" she said. "I swear I didn't plan that." A soft murmur passed through the group, that ripple humans make when sincerity brushes their skin. Mara's chest lifted with a feeling she could not name at first. It arrived as recognition, then warmed into invitation. She glanced at Theo, who wasn't looking at her, but at the lake. His mouth relaxed into a thoughtful line. "Whoever wrote that," he said quietly, "understands how things hold." "The engineer approves," Mara teased. "The person approves," he said. "The engineer adds that a clock's escapement can stick a little when it's old. Like its size between beats, the fix is gentle, not force. You line things up. You let them be who they are, just a little better supported." He didn't reach for her hand. He didn't have to. Part of Mara that tended roots for a living knew that a gentle alignment can be more intimate than the rush of anything. She tried the words he'd offered in her head. Line things up. She was not someone who often needed repair. She was, however, someone who sometimes needed permission to be held by something sturdy. The music carried them through dusk into the kind of early night that filters the world down to the essentials. A voice, a guitar, the quiet percussion of chairs, the inside of your own breath. When the musician sang a song about a ferry that never sank, because a woman on deck kept humming the same note over and over as if reminding the water of its duty, Mara felt a tiny ache behind her ribs, sweet and a little sad. She thought of the year her mother had filled her pockets with peppermint and tissues when their dog had died. Everything gentle, nothing rushed. She thought of the way spring bulbs push through ground that looked stern, of a librarian's grateful touch of the hands she had placed into soil 1,000 times and how often they were comforted in return. Later, the porch light glowed with moths doing quiet ballet, and the lake looked like a piece of velvet someone had pinned to the earth. The group began to drift back to rooms. Mara walked the hall with Theo and paused at room 4. The old clock on the dresser ticked in its attentive way, as if it had been listening from the porch, and was pleased to find the night still here. "Listen," she said, tipping her head toward it. Theo stepped in, not crossing the threshold, only leaning with the easy respect of a person raised to honor doorways. He closed his eyes a moment, counting quietly. "It hesitates at 32, he said with a little smile, as if the minute is too beautiful to leave. Mara laughed softly. "I like that story," she said. "Let's not fix it yet, not." Yet he agreed. Besides, some things are truest with a wobble. They said good night with a warmth that had arrived so gently neither of them could say when it had begun. In bed, under the blue quilt, Mara listened to the rain returning faintly. To the little clock's uneven true, to the whispering leaf breath outside the window, as she felt the inn hold her in the way. A good porch holds a gathering, not tight, not loose, just right. In the early morning, before the light had fully claimed the lake from night, she woke to a dream that left its residue like fog, a path she hadn't designed, leading through a grove of maples. Each tree hung with ribbon tags that carried a word: patience, ease, kindness, begin. On the last tree, the word she couldn't. Quite red in the dream clarified as she blinked awake. Stay. Mara sat up slowly, smiling at herself. Stay where? In the bed? In this moment, in this feeling that felt like a lake holding more than it showed, she padded to the window and pushed. It opened farther. The air that slid in was cool and soft, the kind that makes a person want to find a sweater with history woven into it. Across the porch, she saw Theo in a t-shirt and pajama pants. Hair mussed into honesty, reading a book with the intent focus of a man who reads to soothe. He looked up when her window creaked, and the morning made them both a little unguarded. "Coffee?" he mouthed, pointing downstairs. She nodded, miming gratitude. The coffee was strong, but tasted like kindness, and the pancakes were the sort that made you believe in breakfast as a moral good. A few other guests murmured good mornings, and someone told a story about a loon that had popped up near there. Canoe the night before, startling them with its red eye and prehistoric elegance. Asterisk, asterisk after breakfast. On instinct more than plan, Mara and Theo took the path that circled the lake. It was a trail that had been loved into existence by 1,000 footfalls, wide enough for two in some spots, and obligingly narrow in others, making them step into single file and then reconvene. They talked about small things and then one big thing each, like passing a pebble back and forth. He told her about the bridge he'd helped inspect last month and how bridges ask you to trust the math you cannot see. She told him about an elderly client whose only request was that the garden invite her grandchildren to play hide-and-seek without getting scratched by anything. That was my whole brief, Mara said. A place that felt like safety disguised. As adventure, she described how she'd planted feathery grasses that leaned like friends, confiding in how she'd tucked tiny thyme between the stepping stones so that even a misstep was fragrant. Asterisk. When they reached the far edge of the lake where birches kept a quiet secret with the water, Theo stopped and pointed. At the base of one tree, a small wooden box sat like it had settled there decades ago and decided to stay. It wasn't weathered. Exactly. Just at peace. The lid had a brass hinge and a simple knob. No lock? Is that part of the inn's charm? He asked. Or a fairy's filing cabinet, Mara said. Only one way to know. They crouched together and lifted the lid. Inside, on a bed of yellowed ribbon, lay exactly 3 things. A pencil stub sharpened with a knife. A folded scrap of lined paper that had been folded so often its creases looked like tiny highways. And a brass button that had lost its jacket. Theo lifted the paper with care and unfolded it as if whatever it carried would be shy. The note was not long. It read, "When you find a place that breathes with you, leave a piece of weight here and take a piece of light with you. The clock forgives. The lake remembers. Tell the next person something true and gentle." Below the words, someone had written initials, different hands, different years. A little lineage of courage. Mara looked at the button and felt an unreasonable tenderness for its abandoned usefulness. She touched the pencil, then glanced at Theo. "Do you have a truth?" she asked, heart ticking with a clock's brave little wobble. He considered. Searching himself with the same steady patience she imagined he used on load calculations, Yes, he said finally. When I was a kid, I used to think resilience meant never bending. Now I think it means bending toward what matters. Mara breathed in, the breath that comes when a sentence lays a settling hand over something restless inside you. Write it, she said. He did, slowly, the pencil faint but obedient. Then he looked at her, and Mara thought of the word on the dream. Tristan felt it bloom into a larger sentence. I keep thinking, she said, that tenderness is not a weakness to hide. It's the exact shape of the strength we're built to carry. It surprised her to say. It did not surprise her that he nodded like a man recognizing a landmark he'd seen on a map and was glad to find in the world. She wrote it down. They closed the box. Not reverently exactly, but with the affection you give a friend you know you'll see again. When they stood, their shoulders brushed, and to both of them, the contact felt less like an accident and more like a line quietly drawn. Back at the inn, Helen was sweeping the porch in stripy sunlight, the kind of practical caretaking that keeps magic believable. Find anything good out there? She asked, an eyebrow hitching with curiosity. A pencil that tells the truth, Theo said. And a button that knows how to stay, Mara added. And Helen smiled like a person who enjoys being slightly confused by happy guests. Lunch is at 1, Helen said. There's a thunderstorm rehearsing its lines this afternoon. If you hear it practicing, don't worry. The porch has seen better actors. They laughed and went inside, each feeling the inn continue its slow, considerate breathing around them. The old clock ticked from room 4, keeping time like a kind heart, hesitating in wonder. Catching up with Grace while outside, the lake kept reflecting whatever the sky offered. And somewhere between the clock and the lake, between sense and sensibility, between the sturdiness of math and the softness of time between stones, a story had begun to walk around the room of time. It's patient and sure, ready to show them both how love feels when it finally finds the life it fits. The storms. Gentle lesson by late morning, the lake wore its best linen gray, a color that always seems to invite quiet plants. Theo and Mara finished their walk with the easy rhythm of two people who don't need to narrate every step. When they reached the inn again, Helen had turned the kitchen radio to a station that gave the weather in a voice, so calm it could have been reading bedtime stories to barometers. Thunderstorms this afternoon, the announcer said, rolling through from the west like a neighbor who always knocks but still lets himself in. Helen clicked the radio off and grinned at them. Our porch has opinions about thunder. She said it enjoys the drama. Lunch at 1, corn chowder, salad with the last of my cherry tomatoes, and biscuit therapy. Therapy, Mara asked. You'll see, Helen said, and disappeared into the kitchen where butter and flour would soon be caught doing something. Righteous Mara and Theo drifted toward the parlor, the way leaves turn toward light. The parlor had a rug with a faded compass rose at the center, a couch that had clearly hosted naps, and a bookshelf with a hand-lettered sign, borrow a book, borrow a nap, return both when you're done. On a side table, a brass tray held postcards printed, with an old photograph of the insane porch, fewer maples. A jar of pens waited beside them like a standing invitation. Write something to someone who needs this view, a sticky note suggested. The corner curling in the humidity. The world could use more gentle assignments, Theo said, picking up a postcard and tapping its edge on the tray as if inviting a thought to land. You write yours, Mara said, and I'll write mine. We'll mail them even if they're to ourselves. They chose chairs by the window. The wind toyed with the birch leaves and the lake nodded along. Mara's postcard began to write itself in her head before her hand caught up. Dear future me, if you read this when you're late for something, remember the clock in room 4 that hesitates at 32 because beauty deserves a breath. Take that breath, you'll arrive more whole. She added the inn's return address in case the postal service felt mischievous, and slid the card into a small wooden box labeled Outgoing Kindness. Theo looked up from his postcard with the expression of a man who had just told himself the truth and found it kinder than expected. Mailed a letter to an old friend, he said, by which I mean the part of me that forgets how to rest unless the power goes out. That guy is a hero in a lot of offices, Mara said. He's useful, Theo admitted. But he doesn't. always know when to set the wrench down. The clock on the parlor mantel ticked with that persuasive, not quite regularity. From upstairs, an echoing twin maraz, clock kept companionable time, a kind of calandre response through the bones of the house. The harmony soothed like a remembered lullaby. Just before lunch, the first distant rumbles made themselves known. Thunder that far away always sounds like someone shoving furniture in a room you can't see. The light shifted by degrees, the way a theater's house lights dim before the curtain rises. Guests began to return from their own lake loops. A couple from Boston, identifiable by their Red Sox caps and the way they said park, like the R, had gone to fetch a friend, set a stack of board games on the coffee table. A retired music teacher, with hair the exact color of piano keys, arranged a vase of zinnias so bright they seemed to hum. The yellow dog reappeared and sighed into a nap in the most inconvenient walking path through the parlor, as if performing a public service. Asterisk lunch arrived like comfort arriving home, bowls of corn chowder steaming, the scent of thyme and pepper. Rising, a salad bowl glazed the color of rainwater, cupping the tomatoes in shades of red that out-targued the gray day. And the promised biscuits, tall as pride with flaky sides that invited butter to live its best life. People ate without ceremony and with appreciation, that particular chorus of satisfied hums that good food conducts out of groups who didn't know they were a choir. The thunder auditioned closer now, a confident baritone. Rain began as a fine brush, then became a wide stroke, then committed to the canvas. When the sky finally opened, the porch applauded. Wind pushed a cool breath through the screens, and someone, maybe Helen. Maybe the house itself turned on two small lamps in the parlor, so their warm round light could remind the corners they were not alone. The musician from the night before, braid pinned in a crown today, tuned her guitar near the doorway. "Storm key," she said to no one in particular, and strummed a chord that found the weather's note and slid alongside it. Theo and Mara sat on the floor near the coffee table, a backgammon board open between them like a map. Theo had played as a kid with his grandfather, a man who spoke with the confidence of a person who had seen rivers flood and recede and who therefore trusted the persuasive logic of patience. Mara knew the game in theory, but led with her intuition, which left room for luck and favored graceful recoveries. They played as the storm wrote its long, silver sentences across the lake. Their knees leaned in, then away, then in again. There. Shoulders occasionally touched and rewrote what that contact meant in small, steady revisions. "Do you always tiptoe around thunder?" Theo asked, moving a piece with the careful decisiveness engineers are taught, though today it also held. "Affection. I respect it," Mara said. "Plants listen to storms like they're taking dictation from something older than them. I learned to listen, too." She considered the board and the path of her pieces. "I also learned the line between caution and fear can get fuzzy." Theo rolled the dice, watched them settle. "I used to think caution was a fortress. Lately I think it's a compass. It's supposed to help you aim, not keep you from leaving the house." "Compass over fortress," she repeated. "I'll steal that and pretend I've always thought it." "Borrow," he corrected lightly, smiling. "Thoughts prefer circulation." A flash brightened the windows, a white that wasn't quite color, followed by thunder that arrived so fast it felt like a drum under the floor. The yellow dog opened one eye, judged the house adequate to the task, and slept again. A light blinked once, like a wink, and went out. The room paused, reconsidered, then the other lamps clicked off too. The storm had flipped a switch somewhere. "Between here and the town?" "Okay," Helen said in the immediate quiet dark, her voice all lantern and steady palm. "We've rehearsed this before." She crossed the parlor with the surety of someone who knows not only where the furniture lives, but where it naps. Came back with a box of candles and 2 actual lanterns with real soot on the glass, where flame and breath had kissed. She set 1 lantern on the piano and 1 on the floor beside the coffee table. Candlelight did what it always does, made faces look like truer versions of themselves, and invited everyone to believe in gentleness as a standard operating procedure. Musician's guitar sounded warmer in the dark, the wood of it a second voice, like she sang older songs now. the kind that paddle steadily forward, that don't ask much of a listener except presence. Theo's shoulder found Mara's, didn't race. Away from the contact, didn't need to comment on it. They finished their game with the measured drama of two people who've agreed the outcome matters less than the company. When the game ended, a narrow win for Theo, which he accepted with the humility of someone who knows biscuits had more too. Do with it than strategy, he reached into his canvas bag and brought out a small metal case. "Don't laugh," he said. "I'm predisposed to kindness," Mara promised. He opened the case to reveal a tiny, tidy set of tools. Miniature screwdrivers, tweezers, a soft brush, a folded cloth. "I carry this because I'm the kind of person who secretly hopes for a clock in need of gentle encouragement," he said. "I don't fix things to control them. Fix things to listen better to what they want to do." That, Mara said, is both nerdy and wildly attractive. He laughed, soft, surprised. Candlelight turned his eyes olive. "I thought maybe later," he said carefully, "we could see if room 4's clock wants a little help staying itself." Staying. Itself, she repeated. "Yes, but only if we promise not to straighten out the part where it marvels at 32. "Deal," he said. The word held more than clockwork. Outside, the rain gave the porch a second act. The musicians set her, guitar aside, and joined a circle near the window, where guests had started telling storm stories. Little vignettes about power outages that had gone from inconvenience to legend. Birthday cakes eaten by candlelight that tasted better for it. Neighborhood block parties born from empty refrigerators. A grandmother's voice teaching everyone. The words to an old song because the TV had given up and the night had asked for something human. Mara shared one from the summer she was 8, when lightning had struck the maple in their backyard, and her mother had made a ceremony of planting a sapling beside the old stump. "We called it the Maple of Second Chances," she said. "Grew like it understood the assignment? Did it make it too tall?" the retired music teacher asked, chin on her hands. "Taller than me," Mara said, "and I still measure myself against it whenever I go home." As the storm unspooled, Theo told a story about the first bridge he ever trusted. A old truss bridge no one loved until people realized it was the most direct way to a park where the city set up summer movies. It groaned like an old man. "When trucks crossed," he said, "I learned to listen to the kinds of groans that mean safe and the kinds that mean hey. Maybe check my bolts." The first time I signed off on a repair plan, I felt like I was shaking hands with something larger than me, promising I'd keep learning how to hear it. "You bring that to people too, don't you?" Mara said. More observation than question. He looked at her like someone who'd just found his hometown on a map drawn by a kind stranger. "I try," he said. The rain slowed as if another town had asked politely for its share. Lamps blinked back on with a jittery confidence. Someone clapped once, the sound landing exactly halfway between humor and gratitude. The musician, practical in victory, said, "Lanterns stay lit for the vibe." And no one argued. Light layered itself, daylight returning, lamp glow, candle flame. The room looked as if it had remembered how to be 3 kinds of warm at once. Later, when afternoon leaned toward evening, and the storm stayed only as an aftertaste of petrichor, in distant muttering, Helen put a plate of lemon bars on the piano and said, "Amen," for making the house feel fuller than any generator. People helped themselves and drifted to corners they preferred: porch, parlor, the carpet by the fireplace where the dog had annexed territory. Theo and Mara carried their lemon bars upstairs like contraband, the sugar crackling under the thin, shiny topped in room 4. The old clock kept its faithful, imperfect beat. It looked smaller up close, dignified without asking to be. Theo set his tool case on the dresser and paused. "Permission," he said, looking to Mara. "Even with things I like to ask." "Have it," she said, "on one condition." Waited. "If it tells you it likes being itself as is, we listen." "I promise," he said, and opened the case. Watching Theo work was like watching someone eavesdrop on time with reverence. He took off the back carefully, keeping each little screw in a row like brave soldiers. He blew the softest breath to dislodge dust, then used the brush to persuade what breath had missed. He checked the escapement, that heartbeat mechanism that minds the distance between ticks, and adjusted it the faintest hair. He didn't force, he aligned. This, he said quietly, is the part where a thing decides whether it can keep its promise to itself. Mara felt her own ribs draw a wider, easier breath. She stood beside him, close enough to see the small muscles near his eyes focus, close enough to feel the shoulder warmth of someone doing careful work for the joy of it. "Do you do this for people too?" she asked, voice low to match the room's attention. "I try not to tinker," he said. "But if someone asks me to stand nearby while they line something up, a plan, a feeling I can hold the light." "I'm good at holding light." "You are," she said, surprised at how sure she felt. "I think I've been carrying a lamp for other people for a long time. It's nice to set it down for a minute." Theo smiled without looking up. "Can trade shifts." They listened. The clock ticked with a slightly steadier gait now, like someone who had found their balance on a gently swaying boat. At 32, it kept its habit. It paused in admiration, then caught up with grace. Theo nodded, satisfied. "There," he said. "It gets to stay itself and worry less about getting tired." Mara touched the top of the clock the way you pat a friend's shoulder after they've said something brave. "Thank you," she told both of them, "for not making perfection the point. The point is reliable wonder," he said, "and maybe lemon bars." They ate their lemon bars on the small balcony that looked west, where the after-storm sky rearranged itself into a 3-act playgold, then pink, then a blue so deep it felt like a place you could live. Swallows stitched the air with quick, certain loops. Across the water, someone pushed a canoe off the dock, the paddle kisses making a polite rhythm. "Tell me something ordinary about you," Mara said, wiping sugar from her fingertip with the exact care she'd used transplanting. "A seedling the week before, I alphabetized my spices," Theo confessed. "That's not ordinary," she said. "It is when you grow up with a mom who taught chemistry," he said. "We labeled our flower bin by weight and volume. And you?" "I buy postcards and never send them," she said. "The front feels like a promise I can't keep, so I keep them in a shoebox and write 2 places instead of people." "What do you tell a place?" he asked, delighted. "Thank you for the shadows. Thank you for the way your sidewalks don't hurry my feet. Thank you for letting me cry on your benches without asking what was wrong." Things like that. Theo let the idea glow between them for a moment. "What would you write to this place?" Mara looked at the lake, at the lantern-ready porch, at the clock she could hear through the open window counting in its true little way. "Thank you for teaching me that rest isn't something I earn after I finish being a person," she said. "It's part of the way I be a person." He nodded once, the slow agreement of a man who had recently realized his body was a house he wanted to live in kindly. "What are you resting from?" he asked. Not as a demand, but as a hand offered. Palm up. "From pretending I'm not tender," she said after a beat. "I've always been good at being useful. It makes me feel less guilty for having a soft heart. But I want to try letting the softness lead sometimes. I think it might be smarter than I am." "It is," he said. "Soft is smart. It feels where the load actually sits." She looked at him with a mixture of relief and curiosity. "And you?" she asked. "What are you resting from?" Took his time, looking at the line the sun had left on the lake like a memory written in light. "From measuring myself by how much I prevent from breaking," he said. "I want to. Measure by how much I help hold without taking over. Compass over fortress," she said. "Exactly." The sky handed the stage to evening. Porch lights clicked on. Somewhere in the kitchen, dishes made their purposeful music. The house settled the way contented houses do, a small creak in a banister, a floorboard speaking in its sleep. Helen tapped on the open doorframe with 2 knuckles pull, like a neighbor returning a book. "We're making s'mores on the porch," she announced. "I realize you're adults. Eat s'mores anyway. Science supports it. The noble science of marshmallowgy," Theo said. "Peer-reviewed," Helen said, and drifted away. They went, because the day seemed to be making decisions for them they would have made anyway. A tray held squares of chocolate lined up like a checkerboard, graham crackers in a leaning tower, and marshmallows that looked like clouds that had decided to be edible. Someone had a small tabletop burner that made the whole operation feel like camping without the humidity. People toasted, assembled, and laughed with the tidy delight of sticky success. The musician plucked a few lazy notes and sang a lullaby she said she'd learned from a great aunt who claimed to remember the Titanic from before it was history. The song didn't ask the room to do anything but feel safe, on impulse. Mara slipped away for a moment and went upstairs to her bag. She pulled out a smooth river stone she often carried from job to job, pocket weight she rubbed when she needed to remember that time could be felt and didn't always have to be outsmarted. It was oval, the color of wet newspaper, with a single pale stripe across it like an understatement. Back downstairs, she touched Theo's elbow. "Want to take a short walk?" she asked. "I need to make a small deposit." They took the lake path to the birches, where the little wooden box sat with the confidence of a thing that knows it belongs. They opened it by lantern light from the porch, which reached this far like a rumor. Inside, the pencil and ribbon awaited, and the button looked pleased to have company. Mara laid the river stone down with a patience that made it a ceremony. "My piece of weight," she said. Theo studied it and nodded, as if evaluating a beam. "Solid," he said. "Handsome, honest." She smiled. "And you? Do you want to? Leave anything?" He dug into his pocket and came up with something that made her laugh, a tiny hex nut. Clean and silver, a spare from a kit he'd once used to put shelves together in an apartment he had outgrown. He turned it between thumb and forefinger, that universal gesture of consideration. "It's not heavy," he said, "but it holds a promise." He set it beside the stone. The button scooted a dignified hair to make room, at least in there. Imagination. Theo picked up the pencil, looked at Mara. "Trade me a truth," he asked. She nodded. He wrote first. "Today I learned the difference between fixing and listening. I'm going to aim for listening until something asks to be aligned." She wrote, "Today I learned that tenderness is a load-bearing wall. I'm going to build around it, not hide it in drywall." They folded the paper and tucked it beneath the ribbon. When they closed the lid, the click sounded like a small vote for the future. They stood a moment longer than was strictly necessary. The porch light shone through the leaves in friendly geometry. The lake breathed in and out, easy as sleep. On the way back, Theo said, "Sunrise canoe?" "Yes," Mara answered, the word arriving like something the lake itself had approved. "And tomorrow," he added, testing the shape of it. "There's a covered bridge not far from here. People sometimes write notes and tuck them in, though. Beams silly, sincere, both. I could show you how a bridge holds itself if you want. It's like a garden that doesn't mind the wind. I'd like that," she said. "And maybe afterward I could show you the library courtyard I finished. This spring, it's an hour south. The librarian says it smells like summer homework you want to do." "I love that," he said, and he did, back on the porch. Marshmallows had gone into the phase where people roast them just for the alibi of another conversation. The musician put the guitar down and sipped a tea. Helen leaned on the railing like a satisfied stage manager. The dog dream ran, feet twitching in pursuit of something it would never admit. Wrong. Mara and Theo settled into the rocking chairs without, asking each other where to sit, as if the chairs had always intended to end up like this. The house clock chimed the hour again. Deeringly wrong, perfectly itself. At 32 past, upstairs. Room 4's clock did its favorite thing. It hesitated in praise of the minute, then hurried to keep faith with the next. Theo listened for it and smiled when he heard the tiny, brave pause. Mara, feeling the house's breath match her own, let her shoulder lean until it found Theo's. He didn't shift away, neither did she. No one announced it. No one teased. The porchwise in the ways of beginnings simply widened its idea of what it was holding. A lantern hummed. The lake took the sky's last color and decided to keep it a little longer. Somewhere close, a loon called, that hollow, echoing sound that makes a human chest feel older and better made. The night agreed to be kind when Mara finally went upstairs. She set her phone on the nightstand and almost texted her brother. A simple sentence met someone who understands clocks and kindness. She didn't send it. Some messages are sweeter after sleep. She brushed her teeth by the small lamp, slid under the quilt, and turned her face toward the open window where the birches etched soft sounds on the air. The clock ticked like a small, faithful animal. Mara closed her eyes and pictured a compass smiling at a fortress as it turned toward morning, down the hall. In room 5, Theo lay on his back, hands folded on his chest in that old habit of men who learn to keep their feelings where they could find them later. He listened to the rain's memory, to a house carefully not creaking, to the imagined weight of a stone in a wooden box. He pictured a bridge, the kind you can walk without thinking, and also the kind that makes you think about every bolt because you love the way it holds. He pictured a courtyard with time in the joints, a librarian smiling like summer. He pictured a clock that respects 32 and a woman who called tenderness a load-bearing wall and meant it. Sleep found them both, like a kindly bus driver who knows every stop by heart, and the inn, breathing at the pace of 2 steady hearts plus its own, kept watch the lantern, the lake, the clocks conferring in their soft, durable language ready to teach them in the morning how the gentle work continues. Boats launched. Without hurry, pancakes that taste like a promise kept. And the quiet. Certain knowledge that something had begun that wanted to last. The dawn canoe morning. At the Maple Lantern Inn did not simply arrive. It drifted in like a thoughtful guest who knew how to be quiet. The lake mist lay across the surface like folded lace, lifting only when the sun grew confident enough to touch it. Birds made the first commentary, sparrows with their brisk chatter, loons with their long, echoing calls that sounded like they'd stolen secrets from older centuries. Theo was already awake. He stood on the porch, a thermos in one hand, watching the lake slowly reveal itself. He wore a sweatshirt with the hood half up. His expression carried the look of a man at peace, and yet waiting for something to begin. When Mara stepped down the porch stairs, still pulling her cardigan sleeves past her wrists, he turned and smiled in that quiet way that makes you feel like the morning itself has noticed you. "You ready?" he asked, nodding toward the dock. A canoe sat tethered there, red paint scuffed at the edges from seasons of patient use. "As ready as a person can be at 6:30, Mara said, stifling a yawn with the back of her hand. "Do you always keep promises to lakes?" "Every time," he said. "They keep more secrets than bridges do. Feels polite to show up when we've agreed." They pushed the canoe into the water, the wooden hull creaking as if remembering all the hands that had done this before. Mara stepped in first, balancing with a surprising grace born from years of steadying her weight between rows of soil beds. Theo followed, setting his paddle across the gunnel with the precision of someone who trusted leverage more than luck. The water accepted them quietly, sending only the smallest ripples toward shore as if respecting their entrance. For the first stretch, they didn't talk. Paddle strokes fell into a rhythm that felt older than them both, a calandre response between wood and water. The lake reflected the sky's indecision, pink here, silver there, a faint gold gathering at the
Mara
east
broke
like
the
a thought
silence.
forming. Mist lifted in
I used to
ribbons,
think early
making
mornings
each tree on the
belonged to
far
farmers
bank
and
look both
joggers,
present
but
and half
this-
remembered. She let her paddle rest across her knees. "This feels like being led into a conversation I didn't know was happening." Theo nodded, water sliding off his paddle in silver drops. "Bridges have conversations too," he said. "Most people only hear the cars, but if you stand underneath, you hear how the steel answers itself. This lake, it talks in vowels. Bridges talk in consonants." Mara laughed softly. "And do you understand both dialects?" "Enough to be humbled by them," he said. They glided toward the center where the mist thinned, to show the inn behind them its porch, its line of rocking chairs, the lantern still faintly glowing, as if reluctant to let go of night from here. The house looked smaller, almost modest, as though it didn't need anyone to admire it, only to trust it. "Can I tell you something odd?" Mara asked. "Odds, our best category," Theo reminded her. She trailed her fingers in the water. "Watching the rings spread, when I was a kid I thought lakes were just sky mirrors, flat and reflective, but now I think they're more like safes. They keep everything people toss into them. Stones, wishes, lost buttons, even words. And sometimes, if you're lucky, They let you borrow one back. Theo dipped his paddle and paused. Maybe that's why the box is there, he said. Just a guest tradition. Maybe the lake keeps watch. They floated a moment, letting the boat turn lazily. The loon called again, its cry bending the air with a lonely sweetness. Theo leaned his paddle across his lap and looked at Mara. His eyes held that steady green color, weathered and honest. I keep thinking about what you said last night. Tenderness as a load-bearing wall. Mara felt heat rise to her cheeks, the kind that wasn't embarrassment but recognition. It surprised me too, she admitted. Felt like something the dream wanted to say through me. Well, Theo said softly, if you're building with it, I'd like to stand close enough to help hold the beams. Her throat tightened. In that way, that happens when someone gives you exactly the reassurance you didn't know you were still missing. She wanted to reach for his hand, but instead she dipped her paddle and moved them forward, the gesture enough to say, stay with me. They paddled toward the far end of the lake where maples leaned in, their roots sipping directly from the shore. Sunlight began to burn through the mist, laying paths of gold across the surface like invitations. The whole scene felt choreographed for them alone, though they both knew it had been performing this ritual long before they arrived and would continue long after. As they rounded the bend, they saw something neither expected. A small wooden pier, half collapsed, jutting from the trees. It looked abandoned, swallowed by vines, yet still reaching into the water with stubborn dignity. Do you think anyone remembers this is here? Mara asked. Theo studied it the way engineers do with both eyes and imagination. It held once, he said. Might not hold now. But even in this shape, it tells a story about wanting to meet the lake halfway. They pulled the canoe alongside, cautious not to lean their weight onto the pier. Up close, Mara noticed initials carved into the remaining planks, some old enough that moss had softened the grooves, others fresh enough to still show splinters. One of them says 1983. She murmured, brushing her fingers across the weathered letters. Theo smiled faintly. Maybe you were always supposed to find it, she teased. Or maybe it's proof that even failing structures can keep offering gifts, he said. They stayed there longer than intended, talking in soft voices about ordinary things that sounded extraordinary in that setting. Favorite books? The smell of first rain on pavement? The satisfaction of hammering a nail straight the first time? Each answer felt like a stone placed carefully into a path that was leading somewhere neither rushed to name. When they finally turned back, the lake had become fully itself again, bright, awake, blue stretching wide. The inn waited on shore, porch chairs glinting in sunlight, Helen likely already preparing another round of coffee for whoever wandered in. Theo angled the paddle and said, "Want to steer us in?" Mara grinned, gripping her paddle with both hands. "Only if you promise not to judge my technique, only judge whether we arrive," he said, leaning back to let her set the course. And as the canoe slid toward the dock, water whispering beneath them like a secret being kept, both felt the same quiet realization. Some mornings don't just begin a day, they begin a story. The Bridge of Notes by mid-morning, the sun had fully claimed the sky, polishing the lake into a steady silver blue. The air carried that faint post-storm, clarity crisp, rinsed, and a little sweeter than usual, as if every leaf had agreed to do its best impression of newness. Guests at the inn drifted into their own rhythms. Some reading on the porch, some walking the trail with steaming mugs. Helen bustling in and out with baskets of folded laundry as if even chores could participate in the peace. Mara and Theo lingered, over a second cup of coffee at a small outdoor table, the lake view too generous to abandon quickly. The steam curled above their mugs in gentle spirals, dissolving into the cool morning air. Mara stretched her legs and exhaled. "So about this bridge you mentioned, it's covered with secrets in the beams." Asterisk Theo grinned, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly. "Pine Hollow Bridge. It's 20 minutes by car. Built in the 1870s, back when people trusted wood and trusses more than steel. Locals still use it, but it has a tradition. People write little notes and tuck them between the beams. Lovers' promises, apologies, even grocery lists. Nobody polices it. The bridge just holds them." "That sounds like a cousin to our birch tree box," Mara said, "except with traffic." "Exactly. Bridges don't judge. They just carry what you bring." The drive took them through rolling farmland, where barns wore coats of peeling red paint and cows dotted the hillsides like punctuation marks in a quiet essay. Windows down, they let the wind fill the silence between words. It was the kind of silence that didn't need fixing an agreement between two people. That presence was its own kind of speech. When the road dipped, the bridge appeared. Long wooden, its sides weathered to a gray that looked closer to wisdom than decay, a peaked. Roof sheltered the planks, and the entrance framed the shadowed tunnel beyond like an invitation. Sunlight slanted through narrow slats, creating stripes of gold across the inside. Theo parked just before the bridge, and they stepped onto the old timbers. The smell of aged pine, warm tar, and river water rose around them. Amara pressed a palm to the railing, feeling the faint vibration each time a car rattled across. The sound was not sharp but patient, as though the bridge reminded every vehicle. "I've been here longer than you. I'll keep holding as long as you're gentle inside." The tradition announced itself. Slips of paper peeked from between beams. Some were folded, some curled with humidity, some pinned with tiny nails. Mara leaned close to read a few. "We kissed here. May it last as long as these boards. I'm sorry, Dad. I should have called sooner if... You're reading this? Wish me luck on my first year teaching. Meet me here next summer. Same day, same place." Mara's chest tightened at the sincerity pinned into wood. "It's like a choir of whispers," she said. Theo touched one slip lightly, careful not to disturb it. "Engineers talk about load distribution," he said. "The way weight spreads so no one beam breaks. These notes feel like that. 1,000 small confessions, spread out so no one heart has to hold everything alone." Mara exhaled. "You make even math sound like poetry," he smiled sideways. "It's the wood doing the poetry. I just translate." They walked slowly through the tunnel, their footsteps echoing soft against the planks. Near the center, Theo paused, slid a folded square from his pocket, and handed it to her. "I wrote this after breakfast," he admitted. "Didn't know if I'd share, but it feels like it belongs here." She unfolded it carefully. His handwriting was neat, angled, the kind of script that suggested years of drafting diagrams. The note read, "If love is math, may it be the kind that trusts the unknowns. If love is a bridge, may it hold not just our weight, but the storms overhead too." Mara blinked back the unexpected warmth behind her eyes. "Theo, too much?" he asked, his tone both playful and vulnerable. "It's exactly enough," she said. He countered gently. "And now I feel completely underdressed because I didn't bring anything. But if you want paper," he pulled a small notepad from his bag, offering it with a grin. "Engineer Boy Scout." She laughed, took the pad, and stood thinking while the river murmured below. Finally, she wrote in slow strokes, "If tenderness is a wall, may I stop hiding it behind paint. If trust is a lake, may it remember this moment when I forget." They tucked both notes into a beam, side by side. The wood accepted them silently, folding them into its archive of human longing. When they stepped out the other side of the bridge, the sun struck their faces with a warmth that felt like applause. The river shimmered beneath, and swallows darted through the open arches, stitching air with quick loops. "Hungry?" Theo asked, glancing at her. "Starved," Mara admitted, "but not just for food." He caught her meaning without pressing, only offering his hand for the brief walk back to the car. Her fingers slipped into his easily, as though they had rehearsed this gesture in another life. They drove into town, found a diner that smelled of bacon grease and maple syrup, and ordered blueberry pancakes that came stacked like promises. Watched Theo cut his pancakes with methodical neatness, then steal a piece of hers with an unapologetic grin. She thought of how the morning had unfolded. Canoe, bridge. Stan realized it had all carried the same lesson. The world was built to hold, if only you trusted it. Later, as they headed back toward the inn, Mara rested her head against the passenger window and closed her eyes. Theo glanced at her and felt something quiet settle in his chest, something less like excitement and more like belonging. He didn't speak it aloud, not yet. Some truths deserved a long road home before they were voiced. Back at the Maple Lantern, Helen met them on the porch with a basket of fresh laundry and a raised eyebrow. Did the bridge behave? Kept our secrets, Theo said. Helen smirked knowingly. That bridge has a better memory than I do. Careful what you trust it with. Mara felt the weight of her pocket where her pen still rested. She smiled, softly, thinking not of caution, but of courage. The inn door swung open, releasing the smell of apple pie cooling on the counter. Afternoon leaned forward, full of more possibilities. And for the first time in a long while, Mara felt that her own heart was not something fragile to be guarded. It was something strong enough to be carried, and soft enough to be worth it. The afternoon of pie and promises by the time they stepped. Back inside the maple lantern, the inn had settled into that lazy hush that afternoons wear like a shawl. Rain-washed light drifted through the lace curtains, touching everything with a drowsy kind of affection. The kitchen smelled unmistakably of apple pie, the sharp sweetness of cinnamon. The buttery weight of crust cooling on the counter. Helen, wielding her oven mitts like symbols of authority, pointed a wooden spoon at them as they entered. Perfect. Timing, pies cooling, teas steeping. If you don't eat something soon, the storm will come back and accuse me of neglect. We wouldn't want that, Theo said, feigning solemnity. Mara laughed, slipped her cardigan off her shoulders, and felt her body settle into the inn's rhythm as naturally as a leaf finding its way onto still water. Where should we sit? She asked. The parlor, Helen declared. The piano looks lonely, and company keeps it tuned. The parlor wore the comfort of lived-in elegance. Framed sketches of wildflowers, an old quilt draped. Over the couch, books stacked in that precarious way that makes you believe they've been read more than once. The yellow dog stretched luxuriously in front of the hearth, rolling onto its back with a sigh that said, "My work here is important, but invisible." Helen delivered 2 generous slices of pie on china plates that bore tiny cracks. The kind that only come from decades of love. Mara lifted her fork, broke through the golden crust, and let the first bite dissolve on her tongue. It was the kind of sweetness that didn't rush, the kind that stayed and whispered about orchards and autumn air. This is... She closed her eyes briefly, the pie equivalent of forgiveness. Theo chuckled, chewing thoughtfully. It's also structurally sound. Crust holds its shape. Filling distributes evenly. Helen engineered this. You can't help yourself. Can you? Mara teased. Not when the math is this delicious. They ate in companionable quiet for a while. Outside, the trees whispered as though they were trading pie recipes in the language of leaves. The mantel clock ticked its imperfect truth, and Mara found herself listening for the tiny hesitation at 32. The pause that felt like wonder. After a while, Theo leaned back, eyes on the piano in the corner. Did you ever play? He asked. Mara wiped her fork clean with the edge of the crust. My mom tried to teach me. I got as far as Claire de Lune with 2 hands uneven before I gave up. But I loved the sound. It always felt like the piano was telling secrets you weren't supposed to write down. Theo walked over, lifted the fallboard, and pressed a key. The note floated out slightly out of tune, but honest, like a voice that had lived a little. I had a neighbor who gave lessons, he said, mostly kids' songs. But once in a while, she'd slip in something older. Said music remembers even when we don't. He played a simple line, halting but warm. Ara? Sat forward, watching. His hands. The notes stumbled, but kept going, like a child running downhill. The sound filled the room with a fragile kind of bravery. That was beautiful, Mara said softly when he stopped. I think the piano did most of the work. He closed the fallboard gently as if tucking the instrument into bed. For the moment they sat in silence, the pie finished, the tea cooling beside them. It wasn't the silence of strangers or even acquaintances. It was the silence of people who had found a frequency they both trusted, and neither wanted to break it carelessly. Finally, Mara spoke. Theo, can I ask you something? Of course.
No.
Do you want? Her voice was not casual. It was the voice of someone tired of small talk. Someone asking for the blueprint beneath the facade. Theo didn't answer right away. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the floorboards as though they were a map. I used to think I wanted certainty, clean lines, numbers that added up. But lately, he paused, choosing words with the care of a man aligning. Beams. Lately, I think I want presence, to be somewhere with someone, And no, I'm not measuring it against anything else. Mara felt her throat tighten. It's exactly it, she whispered. He looked up, met her eyes, and you. She folded her hands together in her lap. I want to stop apologizing for how much I feel. People call me sensitive, like it's a flaw. But I think it's my compass. I want someone who doesn't just tolerate that, someone who values it. Maybe even leans on it when their own compass gets foggy. Theo reached across the small space, his hand hovering for a moment before she placed hers in it. His palm was warm, steady, and it felt less like being held and more like being anchored. The mantle clock ticked, paused at 32, then hurried to catch up. Mara smiled faintly. Even the clock approves, Hale laughed. The sound low, easy. Guess it's on our side. Just then, Helen appeared in the doorway. A basket of folded towels balanced on her hip. She saw their joined hands, smiled without comment, and said simply, "Sunset will be worth catching tonight." The lake's rehearsing already. Then she disappeared again, as if she had only come to deliver that single line. Asterisk, they didn't let go of each other's hands. Instead, they sat until the shadows lengthened, until the pie plates were empty, and the air outside deepened into that golden hour when everything looks like a painting. Finally, Theo rose, still holding her hand, and said, "Come on, let's see what the lake has planned." The sunset that listened back the day stretched itself thin, easing into that in-between place where the sun lingers, not out of duty but out of affection. Mara and Theo walked the gravel path toward the dock, their footsteps in rhythm, though neither tried to match the other. The air smelled faintly of pine, warmed all afternoon. Layered with the sweetness of lake water cooling into evening, the porch behind them buzzed with quiet. Life guests settling into rocking chairs, Helen clinking glass pitchers of iced tea onto the table, the yellow dog arranging itself into the best spot to watch shadows grow. But down at the dock, it was just the two of them. The boards creaked beneath their weight, each sound folding into the chorus of frogs and early crickets. Asterisk, the lake stretched wide, a canvas of molten copper where the sun's edge brushed the water. Clouds gathered like spectators, their undersides painted rose and lavender. Mara sat first, letting her bare feet dangle over the water. Theo joined her, sitting close enough that their arms occasionally brushed, contact neither of them corrected. For a while they didn't speak. They just watched the sun lower itself with the patience of an old storyteller. The light touched Mara's face and caught in her hair, and Theo thought without saying it aloud that she looked less like someone watching a sunset and more like someone being claimed by it. Asterisk. Finally, Mara broke the silence. "Do you ever feel like sunsets are listening?" Theo tilted his head, considering. "Listening to what?" "To what we won't say out loud," she murmured. "The things that are too fragile for daylight." Looked out at the horizon. Then maybe this one knows I'm scared. She turned to him. His profile was steady, jawline softened by the gold light. Of what? He drew a slow breath, messing this up, wanting too much too quickly. Of building a bridge that doesn't reach the other side. Mara's chest tightened, not with fear but with recognition. "Theo," she slid her hand into his. "Do you feel how calm this is? That's not a bridge rushing. That's a bridge holding. I'm not going anywhere." The words landed in him like anchor stones sinking into soft riverbed weight that steadies rather than drags. He closed his eyes for a moment, let the lake breeze fill his lungs, then opened them again. "Thank you," he said simply. They sat in the hush that follows honesty, listening as the frogs grew bolder with their songs. The water lapped against the dock with small, repetitive affection. And then, almost unnoticed at first, something floated toward them. Mara leaned forward, squinting. "Is that bottle?" Theo followed her gaze. Sure enough, a glass bottle, clear but tinted faintly green, drifted lazily on the ripples. Sunlight glinted off its curve. Something was rolled in side paper. They looked at each other, startled into curiosity, and Theo carefully reached down to scoop it from the water. It was cool in his hand, slick with droplets. He uncorked it, eased the paper out, and unrolled it gently. The writing was faded but legible, penned in looping script that belonged to another era. Mara read aloud. June 12, 1967. To whoever finds this, know that the lake listens. I told it today that I loved her, and she said yes under the birches. If you're reading this, may the lake bless you too, A&J. Her voice caught at the last line. The note felt impossibly alive, as though A&J had only just left the dock. Theo folded the paper carefully, reverently. The lake really does keep everything, he said. Mara touched the bottle, tracing its rim. Maybe it wanted us to know it approves. Neither of them tried to joke about it. Some discoveries deserve silence. They placed the bottle gently on the dock between them, a third presence bearing witness to the moment. As the sun lowered further, the sky shifted to deeper fire, orange melting into crimson, then into a purple so rich it made the water look like silk. The first star pricked the sky, hesitant but brave. Mara leaned her head against Theo's shoulder, and he adjusted just enough so it fit naturally, as though they had been practicing this posture for years. Theo's voice was low. When I was little, my grandfather told me that stars are just pinholes in heaven's fabric. A light that leaks through is love that can't stay hidden. Mara smiled softly, eyes half closed. Then we must be sitting under 1,000 love letters tonight. He turned his head slightly close enough that he could feel the warmth of her hair against his cheek. Do you think you'd ever write one? She didn't hesitate. I think I already have. The mantel clock at the inn chimed faintly in the distance, its beat imperfect but loyal. At 32, it hesitated, as if pausing in awe of the sky, then hurried to catch up. They both noticed, and both smiled without words, after a long stretch of quiet. Mara lifted her head and looked at Theo. The last of the sunlight lingered on his face, and for the first time, she didn't look away when the pull between them became unmistakable. He leaned closer, slowly enough to let her decline. She didn't. Their lips met softly, like the cautious beginning of a song, and then rested there a little longer than either had expected. When they pulled back, the lake reflected starlight instead of sun, and the moment felt folded into the water forever. Theo whispered, almost to himself, I don't want this to be just a weekend. Mara's fingers brushed his. Then let's not let it be. The words felt both daring and safe, a paradox only love can create. They stayed on the dock until the sky turned fully to velvet. Fireflies began their small lantern dances in the grass. The bottle with its letter glowed faintly in the moonlight, a relic of past tenderness blessing present tenderness. Eventually they rose, carrying it carefully back to the inn. Helen met them at the porch steps, arms crossed in mock sternness. You two look like conspirators. You found a bottle, Theo said, holding it up. Helen's eyes widened. Ah, the lake's archive strikes again. She took it gently, read the note by lamplight, and smiled. A&J, I remember old stories about them. They were regulars here in the 60s. Guess they're still keeping company. She handed it back. Keep it with you tonight. The lake wanted you to find it. Later, in room 4, the clock ticked its endearing rhythm, and Mara set the bottle on the dresser beside it. Side by side, they looked like guardians of time and memory. She brushed her fingers along the glass once before turning out the light. As they settled under the quilt, the sound of the lake drifted through the open window, gentle and eternal. Sleep came slowly, kindly, carrying them like the canoe had that morning, steady, unhurried, safe. And if the lake kept listening, as Mara believed it did, hit her two hearts beating in a rhythm that finally felt aligned. The attic of forgotten. Journal's morning crept into room for not with a shout but with a slow sigh of light. The quilt still held warmth from the night before, and the old clock on the dresser ticked steadily, pausing faithfully at 32 before correcting itself with charm. Mara woke first, stretching beneath the quilt, like someone unwrapping herself from a cocoon. She lay still for a moment, listening, the faint lapping of the lake against the shore, the creak of Helen's footsteps below in the kitchen, the muted bark of a dog chasing some dream. Beside her, Theo still slept on his back, breathing deep. One arm flung out as though he had been building something even in his rest. She smiled at the sight. He looked younger when asleep, less measured, as if even his engineer's mind had surrendered to the mercy of rest. She brushed a strand of hair from her own face and whispered into the morning, "Stay." It was not a request to him, but a word she wanted the day to overhear. They rose slowly, sharing the bathroom mirror with that gentle awkwardness of two people learning the choreography of closeness. Breakfast was already humming downstairs, the clatter of plates, the smell of fresh coffee, Helen humming something that sounded suspiciously like an old folk tune at the long communal table. Plates of blueberry pancakes arrived again, as though the inn believed in consistency as an act of love. Guests murmured greetings. Mara and Theo sat side by side, knees brushing occasionally, exchanging looks that needed no translation. Helen poured coffee with a knowing smile, saying nothing about the bottle now resting safely upstairs. After breakfast, Helen caught them as they were heading for the porch. "You too," she said, lowering her voice in a conspiratorial way. "Have you ever been up to the attic?" "The attic?" Theo asked. Mara tilted her head. "No. Why?" Helen's grin widened. "Most people don't bother. But if the lake gave you a bottle, then maybe the attic will trust you too. It's full of old trunks. Guests leave things behind, or the inn collects what time forgets. Sometimes, it feels like the house wants the right people to find the MZN. Right memory. It's asterisk." She jingled a set of brass keys, selecting one shaped like a leaf. Top of the hall, narrow stairs. "Watch, your head's beams are low. Leave the light on when you're done." She pressed the key into Mara's palm as though passing along a secret. Theo raised an eyebrow. "You're awfully mysterious for an innkeeper." Helen winked. "Occupational hazard." Upstairs, at the far end of the hall, they found the door small, paint chipped, as if it had been waiting decades for this exact turn of the key. The hinges groaned politely when Theo pushed it open. A narrow staircase rose steeply, lined with cedar walls that carried the faint scent of time. The attic greeted them like a library of the forgotten. Dust motes swam lazily in slanted beams of light from two small windows. Old trunks sat like sleeping animals, some leather, some wood-bound with tarnished brass. A stack of rocking chairs leaned against the wall as if retired from duty. Shelves sagged with photo albums, board games missing pieces, and books whose spines had curled with humidity. "This is," Mara whispered, like walking into the house's memory. Theo nodded slowly. Every beam in here is carrying more than its share of stories. They wandered between trunks, lifting lids carefully, touching objects with the reverence one gives to relics. In one trunk, Mara found a stack of dresses from the 1940s Tillingth. Cotton, patterned with faded florals. She held one up, and the light caught its delicate stitching. "Someone danced in this," she murmured. Asterisk. Theo ran his hand across another trunk, its wood scarred, initials carved deep. JT. He opened it to reveal notebooks stacked neatly. The top one bore the title, Summer Journals, Maple Lantern in 1958-1965. They sat cross-legged on the attic. Floor, dust softening around them, and opened the first notebook. The handwriting was slanted, elegant, written in fountain pen, July 2nd, 1959. The lake is listening again. Today I told it my worry that I may never find someone who hears me the way I long to be heard. The clock downstairs skipped twice as if to remind me that time is not perfect but still worth trusting. Mara's breath caught. It's the same clock. They turned pages, reading entries aloud. Stories of guests who had arrived weary and left renewed. Of storms that rattled the windows but calmed hearts. Of confessions whispered into the attic so no one else would. Carry them. One entry made them pause. August 14th, 1963. A young couple sat on the dock at sunset, slipped a bottle into the lake with a note inside. She kissed him before it drifted away. They laughed like children, but the moment felt older. Then both of them. I wonder if the bottle will ever return. Mara looked at Theo, eyes wide. That has to be A&J, the bottle we found. Theo exhaled slowly as though the air had just confirmed a theory. So the lake doesn't just keep things, Ian records them. They sat in silence for a while, letting the words and their implications sink in. Mara traced her fingers over the journal's margin, where the ink had bled slightly into the paper. It feels like this attic holds the echoes of every tenderness that's passed through. Theo looked around at the trunks, the chairs, the quiet objects. It's a load-bearing space, he said softly. It's not for the roof for people. They read until the light shifted toward afternoon, losing track of time in the hum of memory. One final entry in the journal felt eerily addressed to them. June 15th, 1965. If you are reading this decades from now, remember love is not a line. It is a circle. The lake will send back what you need. The clock will remind you when to pause, and the house will open doors only when you're ready. Mara closed the journal slowly, heart thudding in her chest. Do you think? She hesitated, then continued. Do you think the inn knows we're here for a reason? Theo reached for her hand, squeezing gently. I think the inn knows how to recognize alignment when it hears it. They stayed another hour, flipping through albums of black and white photos, guests smiling with fishing poles, women in wide-brimmed hats, children mid-jump from the dock. Each image seemed to whisper, we were here. We loved. We rested, eventually. With reluctance, they closed the trunk, brushing dust from their clothes as they stood. Theo locked the attic door behind them, the click echoing like a promise. Downstairs, Helen raised an eyebrow as they returned the key. Find anything worth remembering? Mara smiled faintly. Everything, Theo added. Your attic, say. Structural marvel holds more than beams. Helen chuckled, clearly unsurprised. Attics do that. The trick is knowing when to listen. That evening, as the sun began its slow descent again, Mara and Theo carried the bottle with A&J's note up to the attic, setting it gently atop the trunk of journals. They left it there, not as an abandonment, but as a return, adding their own chapter to the house's circle. The clock downstairs chimed its offbeat rhythm. The lake breathed outside, and the inn, wise and watchful, welcomed the addition into its long memory. Mara leaned against Theo's shoulder as they descended the stairs, whispering, I think we're part of the circle now. Theo pressed a kiss to her hair. Then let's keep walking it together. And the evening wrapped around them like a quilt, soft, protective, and stitched with the stories of those who had loved before. The lantern that kept its promise morning arrived the way it often does at the maple lantern without fanfare. Like a friend slipping into the room with coffee and good sense. The lake wore a soft blue you could fold into your pocket. The porch had already started its day job, holding chairs, catching small talk, and keeping an eye on the path that ran to the dock. Somewhere in the kitchen, Helen moved through her opening ritual radio low. Kettle on windows cracked just enough to let the smell of pine through the screens. Mara lay awake under the quilt, listening to the old clock tick out its gentle intentions, making that tiny, faithful pause at 32 before catching up with itself. She'd grown so used to the sound it felt like a friendly creature in the room, something that pricked up its ears when a thought turned honest. Beside her, Theo stretched and exhaled, a soft sound that said he was tumbling out of sleep and into the morning without resistance. Hey, he said, voice gravel warm. You thinking? Always, she said, smiling toward the ceiling. But it's good thinking. Same, he answered, turning on his side to face her. I keep replaying yesterday, the attic, the bottle, the way the bridge took our notes, like it's done this 1,000 times. Probably has, she said. That's what I love about this place. It keeps teaching the same lesson, and somehow it never gets old. What lesson? He asked, though he already knew. That things hold, she said simply, if we let them. They dressed without hurry and padded downstairs for pancakes and coffee. Guests were thinner this morning to couples checking out, a solo writer. Bent over a notebook, a pair of sisters trading bites of each other's breakfasts with the easy entitlement of shared childhoods. Helen set 2 plates down with a flourish and a grin. Last day for you too? She asked, reading departure the way sailors read wind. For now, Theo said. We're trying not to make it sound like an ending. Good, Helen said. We don't do endings. We do circles. After breakfast, they took their mugs to the far corner of the porch, where the railing bent to make room for a climbing rose that had ambitions beyond its trellis. The bloom at eye level had opened over night cream at the center, blushing to pink at the edges. Mara touched a petal with one fingertip, reverent. Can I try something today? She asked. Before we leave. Anything, Theo said. Words steady, like a beam set home with a rubber mallet. I want to make the inn a thank you, she said. Something small but real. A bit of time between the stones by the front path. The scent will rise when people step, and they'll feel welcomed before they understand why. Theo's eyes softened in that way that told her he already pictured it. I'll set the stones so they don't creep, he said. We'll give the time the room it wants, and the path the strength it needs. They found Helen and made there. Case Helen listened, hands on hips, a foreman considering an offer she'd hoped would come. You too, she said, are the easiest sale I've had this month. There's a crate of old pavers by the shed. I trust Mara to choose where. The green wants to go. Theo, the shed's hammer is moody. Sweet talk it. So they worked. Mara knelt and read the ground like a second language, lifting a stone here, turning another, placing a sprig of thyme so it would brush ankles and announce itself with a soft green hello. Theo sorted pavers by thickness, eyeing the way they'd settle, tapping them into place with a careful patience that never asked the stone to be anything but itself. The two of them moved like they'd been doing this for years, her checking the roots, him checking the grade, both adjusting with kindness. Neighbors and guests drifted past, pausing to comment in the lightly odd voice people use around gentle work. The yellow dog flopped where a patch of sun made a warm rug on the gravel, keeping half an eye on the proceedings, as if they needed quality control. Helen brought lemon water with sprigs of mint and a bowl of cherries, as though hydration and sweetness were part of the building code. By late morning, front path felt new without looking, new stones steadier, time tucked in like friendly punctuation. When the breeze slid through, the scent lifted and threaded into the porch air. The inn itself seemed to exhale, the almost audible shift old houses make when something right has been done to them. Walk it, Theo said. Mara stepped up, crossed the path, and without thinking slowed. Act! The scent tugged memory forward. Library courtyards and small triumphs, her mother's pockets filled with peppermint. Riverstones rubbed thumb-smooth while plans aligned. She turned to Theo. Yes, she said. Now it says welcome before anyone opens the door. He kissed her temple in quick agreement, then brushed dust from his hands and nodded toward the shoreline. One more small fix? The old, half-collapsed pier waited at the quieter end of the lake, so far from the inn's dock that most guests ignored it entirely. Up close, it looked like a retirement story, still handsome, still holding what it could, asking politely not to be asked for what it couldn't. Theo walked the edge and crouched, studying the cross-bracing. We won't push it past its limits, he said, but we can brace the safe portion so the rest stops worrying. He kissed her temple in quick agreement, then brushed dust from his hands and nodded toward the shoreline. One more small fix? The old half-collapsed pier waited at the quieter end of the lake, so far from the inn's dock that most guests ignored it entirely. Up close, it looked like a retirement story, still handsome, still holding what it could. Asking politely not to be asked for what it couldn't, Theo walked the edge and crouched, studying the cross-bracing. We won't push it past its limits, he said, but we can brace the safe portion so the rest stops worrying. He fetched a couple of short planks from the shed salvaged, weathered to the right grand a handful of screws. Mara held them while he set the planks, working slow, listening between turns of the driver for the soft language of wood agreeing. When he was done, the end section sat truer, not rebuilt, not made young, just given dignity at the angle it could. Still keep there, he said, standing back. We didn't erase time, we honored it. Mara set her palm on the railing. Thank you, she told the pier, like she'd told the clock. like she kept learning to tell everything that had held more than anyone realized. They sat on the new old edge and ate cherries from Helen's bowl, spitting pits into the water. With exaggerated decorum, a heron stitched the sky with long, sincere wing beats. The dock, respectful now of its own limits, gave the smallest creak and relaxed. "Will you come to the courtyard I built?" Mara asked. "I want to show you where time first taught me to trust small things." "I will," he said. "And then you'll come see the little pedestrian bridge near my place. It hums in B-flat when the wind hits it right. It's ridiculous. And I love it." They traded dates and locations while pretending they weren't doing something brave. Schedules align themselves like materials arriving on site just when the scaffold stands ready. He could be in her town in 9 days, she in his 2 weeks later. Neither felt like a test. Both felt like steps a good path would plan for you, if you let it. Back at the inn, Helen met them with 2 paper-wrapped sandwiches and a look that tried to be stern and failed. "Eat," she said. "Then come sign the ledger. You haven't yet. Everyone who leaves a mark here writes something, besides their names." The ledger lived on a stand by the front door, handmade, its wood soft with years of hands. The pages were lined but patient. People had written poems, left recipes, sketched maps, drawn sketches of the porch dog. Theo read a few entries with the small smile of a man reminding himself that strangers are better than the news suggests. Mara took the pen first. She didn't overthink. "Tenderness is a load-bearing wall. We set a few stones today to prove it. If you step and smell time, walk slower." It's saying welcome. She dated it and added a small thyme sprig sketched in the corner. Theo wrote beneath, "Compass, not fortress. Bridges, not barricades. If the clock in room 4 pauses at 32, take that breath with it. Then keep going together." He added a tiny drawing of an escapement wheel that somehow looked friendly, then capped the pen. Helen read their lines and nodded once, eyes bright. "Exactly," she said. "Now, because the house likes its circles closed, go up to the attic a minute. There's a box I didn't show you." They traded a look, intrigued, amused, unable to pretend the house hadn't become a character in their story, and climbed the narrow stairs. The attic accepted them like returning cousins. Sun angled in, glinting dust into something like confetti. Helen's directions had been exact. Far right. Under the slope where the roof leaned low, a small cedar box with a maple leaf latch dot inside lay. A handful of oddments. 3 old keys without doors. A pressed clover and waxed paper. A postcard of the inn postmarked 1947. And a small folded page tied with green thread. Mara untied it, careful as surgery. For the ones who will know when to open this, it read in that same looping script they'd seen in the journals, "Some love belongs to the lake. Some love belongs to the road. Bring the lake with you when you take the road. A thyme sprig in your pocket. Button in your coat." A sentence you can repeat when weather changes. We don't fix everything. We learn how it wants to hold, and we hold with it. Below the words, A, who kept writing, J, who kept listening. "A and J," Theo said, soft as a footfall on an old stair. "They were letter leavers," Mara said. "Bridge noters. Dockissers. And attic whisperers," he added, folding the page back with a careful kindness that felt like returning a book on time. They tucked the box away and stood a moment longer, letting the house's long memory press gently against their shoulders. Afternoon unrolled itself like a map too simple to get lost in. They napped without guilt, hands loosely laced as if to reassure the part of sleep that worries about separation. They read quietly in the parlor, she with a novel full of decent people-making. Decent choices. He with a thin book about wooden trusses written by someone who loved them. They wandered the loop around the lake and found the box by the birches exactly as they'd left it. The stone and hex nut sitting like neighbors whose small talk had turned into real talk. They added nothing and took nothing. Some visits exist, just to say, still here, still good. By the time sunset gathered, the porch had assembled itself for music and goodbyes. The woman with the crown braid tuned her guitar. A teenage boy with a shy grin carried out a mandolin, and Helen handed him a pick like a blessing. The air had that gold that makes everybody forgive everybody. Even the dog looked apologetic for nothing in particular. Mara and Theo took their now usual seats side by side, the rocking chairs adjusting under them the way chairs do when they've claimed you. Tea glasses sweated gently on the table. Lemon slices did their small float. "Before we leave," Theo said, "I want to give you something to carry. Thought you left your hex nut with the lake," Mara said, teasing lightly. "I did," reaching into his pocket. "But I brought two." He placed a tiny brass compass in her palm, one of those pocket charms. Not a hiker's instrument, the kind you buy because you believe direction can be carried by intention. Its face was simple, an N that looked hand-lettered, a needle that quivered and settled. "So, you'll remember we said compass, not fortress," he said. "And because the idea that when we're apart, our needles will point at the same word, north," she asked, smiling. "Home," he said, and then, because he had learned she liked words said plain, he added, "You are beginning to feel like that." Mara swallowed around a knot that wasn't fright. She closed her fingers over the compass and reached into her canvas. Tote gardener's bags always hide treasures, and brought out a small, cloth-wrapped bundle. "Then you get this. Pocket time. There's a little stitched pouch of dried sprigs and a tiny glass vial with 2 cuttings in water. The dried is for your desk on days you forget to breathe. The cuttings are for your kitchen windowsill. When they root, you'll plant them, and every time you pinch a leaf to finish an omelet, you'll think about letting small things lead." He took the bundle like it was weighty. "I will," he said. "I'll think of you." The music started something old, something kind. The mandolin added a top thread of joy. People hummed or didn't, rocked or didn't. The porch didn't require participation, it required presence. As the first song ended, the mantel clock in the parlor chimed the hour. And all at once Mara knew what she wanted to ask. "Stay a few more minutes after the music?" she whispered. "I want to do one last small thing." "Always," he said. They listened, letting the guitars do their steady work of knitting rooms into rooms and people into people. When the light had tipped from gold to the first shade of blue, they slipped inside. Room 4's door stood open. Clock's face shone faint in the near-dashed dusk. Mara stood beside it, hand on the wood. "You taught me a lot," she told it. "I get to pause without apology. That wonder isn't a schedule problem." She looked at Theo. "Will you? Would you witness with me? I want to set this clock's pause in my bones." He stepped close, standing shoulder to shoulder, so there. Breaths found one rhythm. The second hand clicked, even and brave. When it reached 32, the clock did what it had always done. It hesitated, and then hurried. Mara matched it. A breath in, a held note, a breath out, and forward. Theo did the same. They both smiled, a little stunned by how much meaning can fit into one undone beat. He took her hand. "Promise me," he said, and the words were not dramatic. They were a craftsman's request for alignment. "When things get fast, alone, or together, we'll build 32 into the day." "I promise," she said. "We'll make the pause load-bearing." They leaned their foreheads together until their pulses met the tick, then parted with a softness that didn't feel like parting. Outside, the last song ended, and applause rose, light and grateful. Helen's voice floated in s'mores. If anyone has room for joy, they had room. Everyone does when joy is correctly portioned. They toasted marshmallows to the shade they preferred hers, blonde and gentle, his a little kissed by Flamand. Craft-built sandwiches that snapped under the teeth and then surrendered. The night settled without asking for attention. Stars punched through the sky's fabric in a familiar pattern. Love leaks through the pinholes. Tonight it didn't. "Bother to be subtle. Before bed," Theo said. "Will you walk to the birches with me once more?" They took one lantern and went. The lake approved, its surface, accepting their reflections the way old friends take news. Steady, curious, believing the best. The wooden box sat where it should, always should, as if it belonged to tree and path more than to any human caretaker. They opened it and found their folded truth still resting under the ribbon. The stone and hex nut keeping company like they'd won the right. I don't want to add anything, Mara said. I want to repeat, like a chorus. Theo nodded. Then let's say them out loud. He cleared his throat. Listening first, a line when invited. Soft is smart, she said. Tenderness holds. Compass, not fortress, he added. Bridges, not barricades, she said.
I was smiling because she knew how much you liked that one.
They closed the lid. The click sounded like a page turning. The porch lanterns across the water looked small and brave. The path home felt both familiar and new. Back in room 4, they stood in the doorway longer than necessary. Not to delay leaving, but to bless the angle of the room in memory. The bottle from the Leica and Jay's line break of a love no trusted. On the dresser beside the clock, like a punctuation mark that had always belonged in the sentence. Mara touched the glass and felt its cooled breath on her skin. Let's put our own letter in, Theo said suddenly, eyes bright with the kind of idea that doesn't ask permission because it already knows it's kind. Not for the lake, this. Time for the attic. They wrote together at the little desk by the window, alternating lines as if they'd practiced. We came here tired of proving and left here ready to listen. We learned that time can wobble and still be true. We learned. That love is a thing you help hold, not a thing you try to control. We left time at the threshold and a steadier edge on the old pier. If you find this, add your small repair. Breathe with the clock. Walk slow. The lantern will help you look. They signed it with names and the tiny sketches they'd adopted her. Time Sprig, his escapement wheel. They carried the letter up to the attic, slid it into the cedar box with the maple leaf latch, and stood a second, letting the circle snick shut in that satisfying way well-fit parts do. Then down the stairs, back to the porch. Back to good nights that felt less like endings and more like a crew ending a shift on a project that will continue in the morning. Sleep settled easy. It's remarkable how the body cooperates when the spirit is no longer bargaining. The clock ticked. The lake breathed. Wind made a polite suggestion to the birches, and they whispered back. The night held dawn came right on schedule, even for a house that worshipped a late pause. They packed, which is to say they put things in bags, and took out the idea that they'd been changed. Theo tucked the pocket time into his jacket.
Mara?
Slid the brass compass into the small pocket of her jeans where a coin used to live. They carried their bags downstairs, set them by the door, and took one last lap around the porch with the aimless purpose of people making sure to remember. Helen hugged them both with the discretion of a person who knows some goodbyes or prayer. You know how to come back, she said. And it landed as both instruction and prophecy. We do, Mara, said Theo, shook Helen's hand like a vow. Thanks for trusting us with your house. Helen smiled, almost offended. It's not my house, she said. It's just the one I get to keep dust off of. The rest of it is clocks and lakes and people who put the right kinds of weight down, they laughed. And then there was nothing left but the small chore of leaving. On the gravel. Stepping toward the car, Mara paused at the new path. She pressed her shoe into the time's edge, not to crush it, but to wake it. And the scent rose exactly as promised, bright, clean, forgiving. She looked back at the porch. The chairs watched without judgment. The dog raised a paw in what could fairly be called a salute. The lantern over the door glowed, though it was not strictly necessary in daylight. Some symbols don't turn off just because the sun insists. Ready? Theo asked. Ready? She said. And because she believed words should be used for building, she added, I'll see you in 9 days. 9 days, he confirmed. And again and again. They pulled onto the road that curved out past the sign with flaking paint, the one that admits more truth than a glossy brochure. The inn receded in the rear view, not smaller and ever smaller, but correctly sized, as keepsakes are. The lake slid left, then disappeared behind trees that were not in a hurry to share it with travelers. The day ahead felt wide and welcoming. Drove a while without words, which was one of their favorite kinds of conversations. At a turnout, where the view opened like a generous hand, Theo pulled over. They sat side by side, looking at hills layered in green and blue until distance turned the farthest ridge to mist. "I don't know the right ceremony for this," he said. "For what?" she asked. "For promising without scaring it," he said. He took a breath. "So we're going to do it the way we've done everything this week. Listen first, then align." He turned in his seat until he faced her squarely. No gestures, no jokes, just that steady green gaze she'd come to trust. "Mara, I like you in the right ways. The kind that makes me show up early and breathe slower, and want to build things you can walk on barefoot. I don't need a plan big enough to impress anyone. I want a simple plan we can keep. I'll come to your city next week. You'll come to mine after. We'll let the bridge and the courtyard teach us how to hold this without forcing it. We'll put 32 into our calendars on purpose. If a month from now we still feel like this is a thing we help hold, I'll move schedules. You'll move schedules, and we'll see if life wants to move a little for us too. That's it. That's the promise I can keep." She didn't rush her answer, not because she doubted it, but because some yeses deserve to be placed down with care. She thought about time in the path and the way it greeted every foot. She thought about A&J and the way the lake had kept their note in water for decades, intact because it had belonged. She thought about her mother's peppermint pockets and the librarian's quiet gratitude and the board game in the storm and the clock's small bravery. "Yes," she said. "Yes to the simple plan we keep. Yes to 32 on purpose. Yes. 2, listening first. And one little addition." "Of course," he said. "When schedules get stubborn, because they will," she said, "we don't interpret it as fate. We interpret it as weather. We reschedule and go on." He grinned, relief landing in him like a well-set post. "Whether or not fate?" he repeated. "Deal." They sat there grinning like people who had passed a test neither realized they were. Taking a breeze ran its fingers through the grass. Somewhere a hawk wrote its name over a field no one else would think to read. He reached for her hand and she met him halfway across the console. Their fingers interlaced with that right feeling click that still surprised them, even now. "Drive?" he asked. "Drive," she said. Back on the road, the world didn't change. To suit them, it didn't need to. The light ahead was good. The map was ordinary. Company was better than either had known to ask for. And miles behind them, a white clapboard house with a porch that had learned patience from the wind. The clock in room 4 hesitated at 32, admiring the minute as it always had, then caught up with grace. The time at the threshold lifted its scent when Helen stepped out to water the rose, reminding her to walk a beat slower. The old pier held the new brace and felt dignified in its age. The cedar box in the attic made room for one more letter. The lantern above the door stayed lit, even in daylight. Not because anyone needed help seeing, but because some lights are meant to say, simply and always, "This is a place where things hold." The lake memorist and confidant kept its archive and looked forward. Maybe another bottle would drift from its quiet center someday. Maybe a different pair would sit at the dock and tell the water what they were brave enough to hope. Maybe A&J's names would be spoken again on the porch, and someone would add a line to their story that neither of them could have predicted. For now, it was enough that 2 people had arrived. Listened, said a few small things right, and left. Carrying what the place had asked them to carry. A pause, compass, a sprig of green. A sentence simple enough to say in weather of any kind. We don't fix everything. We learn how it wants to hold. We hold with it.